Hello, my name is Jeremy Arnold. I'm a senior business intelligence developer here at OneBridge in Indianapolis. And today we're going to talk about the basics of Power BI Desktop, getting your data in, manipulating it, and then when to use import versus direct query models for your future data modeling needs. First up on our list is we're going to talk about getting your data into the data model itself. You may have a myriad of sources, databases, and wherever they might be, cloud or on-prem, Excel files, text files, access databases that people have made. How do you get that information from all those disparate sources into your data model so you can make it work for you? That's what we're going to talk about first. We're going to talk about this set of icons here, and this is the external data area. You can see we have a couple options. We have get data, recent sources, and enter data. Before I go get the Excel file, I'm going to talk a little bit about enter data. Enter data, basically you get to create your own table. It's very simple. You know, hey, I need to have just a couple little things. Maybe I'm creating a small little dimension table, and I need to know, this would be a good example, I need to know, country and continent, right? And maybe I'm looking at stuff in North America, so I have the United States of America, and that's in North America, and Mexico is in North America, and Canada is in North America. All right, so we're just going to call this our continent dimension. And you'll see it's obviously incomplete, but we'll talk about it a little bit more in a minute. So we're going to go ahead and load that. It won't take long. It's going to bring it in. And the thing is, every data source that comes in, it's going to bring it into the data model, and it's going to compress it. It's going to really bring it in and make it nice and compact so you can get as much data into these things as possible. So now I'm going to go get my data source. So I have this Excel file here. And I'm going to just use this nice financial example. And the first thing you're going to notice when it comes up is in an Excel file, it's going to treat each worksheet like its own individual table space. So every worksheet in the workbook is its own thing. So I have a financials worksheet, and I have the sheet 1. In this case, they're identical because one is just a copy of the other to demonstrate how that works. But you can see Power BI does a really nice job of bringing that data in and then giving me a preview of it so I can see what's going on. Are the columns right? Did I pull in the wrong data? Oh, did I grab the wrong file? I can answer all of those questions by just taking a second here in the navigator window and identifying that I am looking at what I'm supposed to be looking at. So I'm just going to pull in this financial sheet. And you can see that's all here now. It's in my model. And let's create a quick little demo here. So I have country and I have profits, right? So I want to know profit by country. Well, here we go. I have Canada, France, Germany, Mexico, and the United States. Now, remember, we just created this table earlier, and I didn't know everything that was in it. But let's say, hey, I want to, real fast, I have this edited data, and I want to, add a couple things to my continent dimension. But I created it as a table, right? Well, that's actually not too hard. We're going to go into our Edit Queries window. This is where a lot of the data transformation magic happens, and we'll talk about this a little bit more later. But anytime I need to do anything with that, you'll probably go to the source area, and we'll just change that up. So we knew the other two countries were Germany and France, and those are both in Europe last time I checked. Right? So we'll close and apply that. So now I should be able to throw this continent dimension in and figure out what my profits were by continent maybe, right? So let's try that and see what happens. Boom. It worked. So in this case, all we had to do was pull that in, and we can see, look what Power BI did. It detected a relationship here. So I have this field named country, in which case it's unique, right, because this is a dimension table. And I have this. So Power BI immediately knew between these two data sources to create a connection and to basically join them on each other, so that now, if I want to just look at, say, Europe, I can now just look at Europe's results, or I can look at North America's results. Very, very simple, very quick example. I was able to take the Excel file, bring it in, created a little dimension table around country just to show as an example, and Power BI knew immediately to connect the two in the data model after the Excel file came in. Now, it's going to do that based on what it understands from the field names, and if it can identify in one of the tables that that field name is unique. So if I had had the United States, for instance, multiple times in that country table, it wouldn't have worked, because at that point it's no longer unique and it can't do it. So Microsoft Power BI does a great job with one-to-one relationships and one-to-many relationships, but it doesn't do many-to-many as well as you might like. So that's just something to keep in mind as you're pulling in some of these data sources. But you know, I mean, Excel is great, but sometimes you might be working in an environment where you just are getting a raw data dump, and you need to be able to, you know, in the form of a text file maybe, and you just need to be able to bring that in. Well, you can do that too. Whether that's a tab delimited, comma separated, whatever it might be, there are plenty of ways to bring in text files. So, just to give a quick example, I already have this here, so this won't necessarily connect, but actually I don't really have a good text file at the moment that I could use, I don't think, unfortunately. But effectively it's going to do the same thing. The window will be a little bit different because it'll try to identify what the delimiters are. It's a very Excel-like experience in that way, and you'll be able to bring that data in, whether it's tab separated, comma separated, whatever it might be. But, you know, in a lot of cases you also might be connecting to databases, whether that's a SQL Server database, Access databases, you know, or, you know, Oracle, Teradata, maybe something in the cloud in Azure, or, you know, there are so many data sources. Let's just take a look and let me show you how many database type sources there are. So let's ignore Azure and Online Services for a second. SQL Server, Access, Analysis Services, Oracle, DB2, you know, all the IBM stuff, MySQL, pSQL, Sysbase, Teradata, SAP stuff, Redshift, Google BigQuery, Snowflake, Impala. I mean, the options are really, really impressive. And it's actually interesting, Microsoft adds more of these connectors as they kind of get requested, and they go through a beta testing process. So there are currently connectors that are in beta that I don't have enabled here that really do a good job. I remember, it wasn't that long ago, Amazon Redshift, which is, let's see here, you know what, I'll just look for it because I'm not sure where they hide it nowadays. This was in beta not that long ago, but their beta connector was fantastic. Microsoft got some good feedback on it, they did some tweaks, and now it's in general production for everyone to use. So if you have that thing on AWS, if you have Redshift on AWS, you can feel free to connect Power BI to that as well. But I have a pretty nice, simple local access database that I think will provide a really nice example here. So we're going to go get that access database right here. And it's going to ask me where it is. Oh, I have this test database, of course. We're going to let that open up here. And you'll see there are three tables. There's a date dimension, there's the price card, and a purchase order report. So we're just going to pull these two things here, just to show what multiple tables look like, and it'll pull it in like it pulled in the Excel file. Only it's going to look at the table results. Now, one thing that I want to highlight, particularly with Access, because there are a lot of end users who like Access, who like to store data in Access for local use. There's a lot of business users who like to use Access to do their own homegrown kind of ETL stuff, where they're like, hey, I need to transform this Excel data into something else, and I'd rather do it in a quote-unquote automated way inside of Access instead of doing it in Excel. And there's a lot of value to that. But the thing you need to be aware of is, first, remember that Access stores all queries as views. So those queries will show up basically like tables to Power BI. The second thing you need to be aware of is that any of those queries that may use unique Access SQL statements will not function very well. Interestingly enough, Microsoft Power BI doesn't really know what to make of a lot of those unique, kind of more visual, basic-oriented Access, jet engine, SQL type query statements. Stuff that's not native to like ANSI SQL or T-SQL. It gets a little bit confused, and it may kind of push that back. So just as a little hint, if you have one of those types of table or one of those queries that you want to bring in, you may need to go make a make table query and make that query with all of its strange, unique Access stuff into a normal table, and then you can import that table. So I may have made that mistake once or twice in my business and analytics career. So just a little sneak peek on that one, or a little tip. But now I have this data from Access. You can see it came right in. I have a date dimension table, and I have this PO report. And there's tons and tons and tons of fields. And I could obviously start messing with this as well. Just start putting stuff together and figuring out what works. Now it's interesting because you'll note, I'm sorry, it's the wrong one. You'll note that it didn't make any connections this time, right? So, well, I mean, there's a date dimension table that has a unique identifier in that date number, and then this PO report fact whatever, right? I mean, you figure there's something connected on. There's plenty of dates. Well, that's the issue, is it doesn't know what date to connect to. There are multiple fields that have that date type, and it's not exactly sure which one I'm supposed to use. So I'll have to know in my data structure which one I may want to connect to, which is the quote-unquote primary date I care about, and what are the dates that sort of inform everything else around that date. So that's just something to be aware of when you're pulling in things with date dimensions and you have tables with multiple dates. You have to identify what date it may be that you want to create that connection on. So we went through Excel, we've talked about text, and we've looked at a quick Access example. But maybe you're a more advanced user and you have access to some sort of data warehouse or a database. It might be in SQL, maybe it's in the cloud, maybe it's not in the cloud, but you can connect directly to that source. So here, in this case, I'm connected directly to an Azure database in the cloud in this example. And here we have this live connection, because this is in a direct query environment. So I didn't import the data in this case. I just connected directly via an online connection to the database. In this case, it's in Azure in the cloud. And I'm only looking at one table in that database currently, but I could go get more, and I'll sort of demo that here in a second. But I can go take a look at things, and we'll sort of show what that looks like. So let's just say I want to know, by division, and you see it didn't pop right up. Well, it didn't pop right up in this case because it's connecting to that server. So it's basically sending queries to the server instead of doing it in memory. And maybe I want to know what was the count of cert numbers. No, it's not a number. By the way, you can only do things like sum, average, count of things that are actual numbers. So maybe, I want to look at, let's do the sum of gross margin here. All right, so, $24 million, right? So it was able to do that fairly quickly. I mean, it's just from one view, but you can almost imagine Power BI putting the SQL statements together and sending them to the Azure database as it's going through. So, you know, it's select, you know, the name of the table, select division from combined sales report, and then it's select sum of gross, or select division and sum of gross margin from combined sales report, group by division. Right? You can sort of see as I put the pieces together how Power BI is going to translate that into the SQL statement and send that back up to the database. But, you know, maybe I don't want to direct query this. Maybe, you know what, I just want it local because I kind of need the speed and it's not that large. Well, I'm just going to change that to import. I'm going to press OK. And now it's going to go out to the data source. I've already given it my credentials, so it's right here. And now it's going to start pulling rows in. So now it's basically said to the database, hey, I need select star from combined sales report, you know, select all from the combined sales report. And look, I just want you to give me that data now. I don't want to mess with querying you anymore. I just want it to come on in. I'm going to put it back in my data model. I'm going to recompress it. I'm going to treat it like a local data source. And it's going to pull that data in so that I can work with it locally. And if I remember, it's a couple 100,000 rows, so it might take a second to fully pull through. And we'll talk about how to connect to that data source here in a second. So I'm going to go ahead and cancel that because that's really not what's important. But let's just say I need to get this data, you know, and I want to identify its source. Well, I'm going to connect to this Azure SQL database, you know, and let's say I'm going to put in the server address here, and I'm not going to do that here because I've already done this. And then after that, it'll bring me the same menu. It'll bring me that navigator when it first connects to the database, and it'll show me all the tables in the database I asked to connect to, and it'll ask me, hey, which ones do you want to bring into your data model? In a direct query environment, it'll do the same thing. The only question will be, you know, when you first make that selection of import or direct query, which one are you doing, right? So in an import situation, it's going to go get the tables. After you press OK, it'll show you the table list. You'll select the tables you want. It'll go basically, you know, get the tables and the columns from those tables you've requested, and it'll bring those in. And it'll bring them into your local data model. What will happen on the direct query side is you'll tell it what tables you want, and then they're still there. They're out there on the cloud. They're not, you know, they haven't been brought down locally into your data model. And Microsoft's and Power BI then rather will try to compile those SQL statements as you build visualizations and stuff like that, so that it can send those SQL statements to the database, have it run the data, and then give you back the data you've requested. So that's pretty much the introduction to getting your data sources, right? You're always going to start with this Get Data tab, and you're going to look and find what your data source is, whether that's an Excel file, a text file, you know, SharePoint folders. I mean, this whole list, it's pretty darn long at this point. And the cool thing is, and in here I have some betas turned on, the ones that are in beta tend to work pretty well. And even those that are well established, you know, they continue to improve upon them. Just last month on the SAP HANA connector, particularly in direct query environments, Power BI, I think it was in the February 2018 update, made a pretty big change to how those SQL statements get compiled. So it's sending only like one query to the database instead of two as it was doing before. And a lot of end users said that connector was a drastic improvement, even while the other one was technically production ready. So Microsoft is constantly iterating on this and constantly trying to improve it, much to their credit. So again, I'm Jeremy Arnold, and I hope you've appreciated this opportunity to learn a little bit about how to get your data into your data models in Power BI from a myriad of sources, whether they be databases, text files, or Excel files. In the next video, we'll be talking about how to wrangle your data to get the most out of it so you can start getting those insights out of the data that you want.